Hello anatomy and physiology students, this is Mrs. Johnson, and today we're going to be talking about the physiology of a muscle, how a muscle actually moves. Now there's going to be two videos to go over how a muscle moves, and in the previous videos that you watched with Mr. Coder, you learned all about the anatomy of a muscle, the parts of a muscle. What I need you to do first is turn to page 52 of your packet-o notes, and you may at times need to pause this video to catch up on the notes or to watch an animation, and that's perfectly okay. Now, in order to understand how a muscle moves, you need to know some of its functional properties. The first functional property I want to talk about is irritability. Muscles are able to receive and respond to messages sent by the brain, sent by the neurons. Muscles are also able to contract, meaning they're able to get shorter and create the movement that we're talking about. Muscles also have the functional property of conductivity. What this means is that basically muscle cells are able to take the message from a neuron and continue that message through the muscle cells. This is very unique to muscle tissue in that most cells in the body can't do this. And it's pretty cool that muscles can take that message from a neuron and continue that message throughout all the other surrounding muscle fibers and to create a movement. And then lastly, muscles have the ability of elasticity. What this means is that after a movement has been created, after the muscle has contracted, a muscle is able to return back to its original length and do that movement all over again. And it can do that movement over and over and over and over and always resume back to its original length. Now I also want to review a motor unit with you. We looked at this motor unit under the microscope back in Unit 2. And what we're looking at here is one neuron communicating with a skeletal muscle. If you look, the red stripes across the screen are muscle fibers, skeletal muscles in this picture. And then the black lines are axons, which is part of a neuron. And then the clusters at the end of the axons are the axon terminals, where the neuron actually communicates with the muscle fibers. Now, the cool thing is that those axon terminals don't actually touch the skeletal muscle. They get really, really close, but they don't actually touch. A few more definitions that I'd like to review with you is a neuromuscular junction. Now, a neuromuscular junction is basically a zoomed up look on that neuron and that muscle, where that neuron talks to that muscle and sends the message for a muscle to move, okay? Now remember, a neuron doesn't actually touch a muscle. You can see in this picture here, the yellow is a neuron, and you can see that it doesn't actually touch that red muscle, but it gets super close. But this whole area is called a neuromuscular junction, where that neuron ends at the muscle. And then that gap, that space in between the neuron and the muscle, is called a synaptic cleft. And we talk a lot about synaptic clefts in this video because a neuron somehow has to send that message to a muscle. Somehow it has to jump that gap, and we're going to talk about how it does that. It sends chemicals across that gap to communicate with the muscle and to send the message from the brain. Now this slide is not on your packet of notes, but I want you to kind of understand what our goal is today. Today we're going to be just talking about how a nerve stimulates a muscle, meaning how the brain actually sends a message to the muscle and says, hey muscle, move. In the next video we're going to talk about how the muscle actually takes that message and creates a movement. There's two animations that I put at the bottom of this PowerPoint that I think really help explain the overall goal of these two videos. The first one just shows how a neuron sends a message. And then the second video animation just basically shows how the muscles take that message and create movement. You may want to pause the video at this time and watch those videos just so you kind of have a general idea of what we're talking about today. Now, we're going to first talk about how the brain stimulates the muscles. Basically, how does the brain tell the muscle to move? Well, and the first step is the nerve impulse reaches the axon terminals. Now in the nervous unit, which is coming up maybe at the beginning of second semester, we'll talk about how a message actually travels through the nerve. But what you guys need to know for this unit is that the nerve impulse will travel down the axon and then ultimately reach the axon terminal. And once that message has reached the axon terminal, a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine is released. And in this picture you can see the little red dots is acetylcholine. So when that message reaches the end of an axon, these acetylcholine is triggered to release and start going across that synaptic cleft. ACH is the abbreviation for acetylcholine, and we're going to use that throughout this PowerPoint. So once that acetylcholine has been stimulated by the nerve impulse and is released, it starts to travel across that synaptic cleft. Remember, that's the space in between the neuron and the muscle. And that acetylcholine causes the sarcolemma to become open, permeable to sodium. Remember, the sarcolemma is the outer layer of a muscle. If you look at this picture, in this picture, the green is the acetylcholine, and that acetylcholine has bound to that receptor on the red acetylcholine sarcolemma, and it's caused the yellow dots, which are sodium, to rush into the muscle cell. Because of that acetylcholine and the presence of acetylcholine, the sodium rushes into the muscle, and it causes this positive environment inside the cell, inside the muscle fiber. This excess positive ion inside the muscle fiber creates an electrical current, and that's how the muscle can continue that message from the neuron in the muscle. And basically, that's how a neuron sends the message to the muscle. In the next video, we're going to talk about how the muscle actually takes that message and moves. Let me make myself a little bit more clear, because I know those steps are a little confusing. If you took a moment and paused the video and watched this animation, you saw this neuron, this big yellow neuron here, talking to this muscle. This is the muscle. And you see the synaptic cleft right there. And basically you'll see the nerve impulse travel down the neuron. See, there it goes. Whee! And that nerve impulse causes acetylcholine to be released. See the acetylcholine being released? And then that acetylcholine binds to the sarcolemma, and that because of the acetylcholine being bound to the sarcolemma, now sodium can rush into the cell. And do you see that when the sodium rushes into the cell, it allows that nerve impulse, that message from the brain, to continue in the muscle cell and to complete that the nerve impulse, to complete that message from the brain to the neuron. Now in the next video we're going to talk about how the muscle actually takes this little, first understand how a neuron tells a muscle to move.